to present to you our wonderful BC alumni experts who are here with us today, Lisa McAree and Donald Freedman. They both have many years of experience in the world of long-term care as it intersects with their professions. Don is a lawyer and Lisa is a long-term care and life insurance specialist. And they have a lot of years of experience under their belt and are going to give us a lot of good pearls of wisdom today. Lisa, who received her BA from the Lynch School of Education here at BC, is Senior Vice President of the Bishop Company, LLC, an insurance firm specializing in life and long-term care insurance planning. Lisa has focused on long-term care insurance for individuals and corporations since 1994. In addition to her client work, Lisa has served on many industry boards and advisory councils. She recently served as the president of the Boston Estate Planning Council, an 800-member multidisciplinary association organized to provide educational programming to the estate planning community in Boston. And she is a current member of the Executive Women's Study Council on Long-Term Care Issues, the Women's President's Organization, and a founding member of the Council for Women here at Boston College. Lisa is a frequent speaker at conferences locally and nationally and has published many articles in several business and industry journals. She was named to the top 10 insurance professionals by Boston Women's Business Journal in August of 2008. She has also been recognized on the power list of Who's Who in LTCI industry in the November 2008 issue of Senior Market Advisor magazine. Attorney Donald Freedman received his law degree from Boston College and concentrates his practice in elder law, estate planning for families with children with disabilities and other special needs, and counseling of trustees, guardians, and other fiduciaries on appropriately meeting their responsibilities. Don has argued significant elder and disability law cases at both the state court and federal court level, and he has received numerous accolades and awards throughout his professional career, which are far too numerous to mention, but include designations as Boston's best lawyer in the field of elder law, which is published by the Boston Globe, the Boston Magazine designation of super lawyer in elder law and estate planning and probate law, and a peer designation in the annual edition of the Best Lawyers in America for the past 6 years. Beyond his client and legal work, Don gives tirelessly of his time and talent to numerous community and nonprofit organizations, including the Massachusetts and New Hampshire chapters of the Alzheimer's Association, the Learning Prep School, ARC of Massachusetts, and Jewish Family and Children's Services. He has also served on the Governor's Commission on Mental Retardation and as Chief of Staff of the Massachusetts Development Disabilities Council. Please join me in welcoming Lisa and Don here today. Thank
you. Good morning. When I was at the law school here, 69 to 72, it was down the hill, down at Thomas More Hall, and there was literally nothing between the law school and what is now the middle campus, except for a parking lot. It's changed a lot. The law school curriculum has changed also. When I was in law school, the closest course material we had to anything that I'm going to talk about today was called estate planning. Estate planning was really had to do with two things. It had to do with death and transmission of your stuff at death, and it had to do with taxes. The focus here today is on issues that really, well, we need to deal with death and we need to deal with taxes. Really, those issues really take a deep second to the kinds of things I'm going to want to stress with you this morning. And I love the overarching theme title of this program. It's life planning, somewhere in the overall title of the series. And I love that as a topic, because it's really what we're talking about is not so much estate planning in sense of wealth and taxes and death transmission, but life planning in a particular phase, a particular set of needs and individuals. What we're really talking about are the set of supports and services and legal structures and backup that people require between the time that they are no longer work productive, and when they're not earning money, and when they begin to face incapacity or the risk of incapacity, accelerating healthcare needs. This is a stage that people can reach, in childhood if they have a developmental disability. It's a stage that can be reached in early and mid-adulthood with early onset of Parkinson's or MS or Alzheimer's disease. It's a set of needs we typically associate with people over age 65, but there's no magic line on this. We're really not talking about elder planning per se. We're talking about planning dealing with accelerating healthcare needs and concern about incapacity. We're talking about kind of family succession planning, how roles in a family change as a parent may become more incapacitated and more dependent on his children, where the roles had been so reversed initially. So we're really talking about a very broad range of needs and concerns for a varying population of people. What we're trying to do is to figure out ways to mitigate the terrible impacts of increasing health care needs, financial and personal, for people really of any age who come to require that. In terms of services, long-term care was once associated with nursing home placement, and it still is as a component of it. But we're really talking about as a much broader array of services and supports available to people in their own homes, in congregate living arrangements, in special arrangements that they might set up with their own children, in shared housing, congregate housing, assisted living, continuing care, retirement communities, over 55 communities. We even have what are now really beginning to be formally named aging in place situations or arrangements. There are naturally occurring retirement centers. NORC is what the sociologists call it. This might be an apartment house that has people in it who are aging. The place may have been new 25 years ago. People moved into it as a downsizing exercise from their homes. They're aging in place. They want support services, and increasingly people are self-organizing around. Well, why can't we share a care manager for this place? Why can't have a series of nurses who are on call, who know us and can work with us? So we're dealing with really a very wide variety of supports and services that the people may come to require. The insurance industry and I'll be talking about long-term care insurance as one component of the way to pay for this, which is the component where I really get involved, is kind of how to pay for this. I'm not a health planner. I can't plan services. Where I come in, or where lawyers doing this come in, is for the individual to say that this is what I want to do, this is what my doctor says I need, these are the kind of supports I need. How am I going to get them? How do I organize this? We're dealing with eligibility and benefits and so forth and coordinating those. I'll go into more detail in a moment on that. But I think the biggest thing for me that I've learned over the years is that we're talking about a human resources problem for families. Really, people think of the estate planning as being document driven. What people will call up, I'll get a call and I'll say, I want a trust. How much does a trust cost? And you sort of have to. It's fun to get that kind of a question because you can sort of show off that you know something about trusts and you can figure out what it costs. But you really need to back them up to think about, well, what are you concerned about? Why do you think a trust might be appropriate for you? What are your needs and your circumstances? Let's take a step back from the mechanics of specific instruments and try to think of the bigger picture of how we pull things together. The instruments have to be there, but the instruments really are a way of memorializing your intent, of sort of establishing in a formal way structures of things, of how money is going to be managed for you, how decisions are going to be made. But underlying the instrument has to be some very hard decision-making and thought about who is going to do this. That's what I mean about the human resources piece of this. Part of growing older, becoming incapacitated, means that you need to rely more on other people to make decisions for you. You need helpers. You need to identify those people. You need to empower them. But it's the much harder than the instrument itself, like the durable power of attorney, is the consideration of who it is that you're going to name. Spouses will typically name each other, but what if we have a situation of knowing that the spouse herself is facing incapacity, has an early stage of a degenerative condition? How do we deal with the question of the discussion about whether the person still is in a position to serve as my attorney, in fact, under a power of attorney if I become incapacitated? How do we begin to involve the children? We're very jealous about not turning over control to our kids. We like to stay in control ourselves. Facing the need for that possible turnover, how do we begin to incorporate it and deal with it in a sensitive way? How do we choose from among our children without looking like we're playing favorites? These are really hard human questions that really need to get addressed and thought through before you get to the paperwork. All right, let me get into some of the specifics, and let me just check my time. Okay. Well, we're not talking about death planning per se. The issue of having a will and making those arrangements is an important part of life planning, because your death is going to create burdens and responsibilities on your kids. They're going to have to pick up the mess that you leave if your assets are disorganized and no one knows what to do with what of it. So it is an important consideration in doing this planning, is just getting your affairs in order, including what's going to happen to your stuff at death, so that things go where you want them to go, and things can be done with a relative ease and straightforwardness, hopefully with the avoidance of conflict within the family. So the issues relating to the will have to do first with the spouse. If we're dealing with a married couple, you need to think of how you're going to structure this in a way which is protective of the spouse, but at the same time gives full voice to his or her feeling for wanting to continue to have control and access to assets. Sometimes there are healthcare financing issues even tied up with this. The article talks about testamentary trusts. These are trusts that can be very helpful in the context of mass health or Medicaid eligibility, which I'll talk more about in a moment. There's a certain kind of a will with a trust that can be very protective of family assets in the event that the surviving spouse becomes ill. So these are issues where you really have to have all of your concerns on the table with the lawyer you're dealing with. Not only the death, where you want things divided up, but also your concerns about the spouse and about health care financing. Provisions for your children. Children have no right to receive anything from you. There's typically an expectation that they're going to receive. There's an expectation that the gifts will be either equal or will go to benefit some extraordinary effort that one of the child may have provided to you in old age. A lot of things, the children may have special needs, they may have a disability, may not be able to earn their own way. It's critically important that the lawyer you're dealing with on this really have information from you, and open information. If there's alcohol problem among your children, or if there's a marital issue, these may be things you really don't feel comfortable talking about, may not feel they're really relevant in the context of a will, but they really are. I mean, they're protective mechanisms that can be built into estate plan instruments to safeguard the different kinds of interests and concerns that your children may have. If one is a single parent and is really financially stressed, the question may come up about whether you provide specially for that child or not. It's a hard decision. Parents typically come with the perspective that their love and commitment to their children is unconditional and absolutely equal, and they don't want to do anything to suggest that it's not. On the other hand, there are occasions where you may feel a need, because of the varying needs of the children, to provide specially. There are ways of doing it, but it's something that really needs to be talked through. And you have to think about the reaction of the other children as well as the needs of that child. Sometimes we'll make those special provisions outside of the will altogether. The will say equal shares to the kids, but there'll be a life insurance policy that will designate for one particular child and just get it kind of off to the side. Or provide more support through annual gifting to that child during lifetime and leave everything equal at death. There are lots of ways to deal with that, but you really need to think it through. We talk about wills and trusts as being the linchpins of estate planning and transmission at death, but increasingly it's beneficiary designations. These are the terms of retirement accounts and even today brokerage accounts, where you have an opportunity in the account itself to leave an instruction as to where things go at death. And don't forget those. You may have a will that leaves things in equal shares, but if your accounts, because of the beneficiary designations and joint ownership, may pass completely outside of the will by the weight of their own provisions. There's material in here on estate taxes. I'm not going to talk about it today at all, other than to say that it's less and less a problem for most people. The federal tax-free level now is $5.25 million. So most people aren't concerned about that. You can leave everything to the spouse without any trust planning or anything as far as taxes go. And if your combined estate is under that level, there's no federal tax issue. The state level is only $1 million, but the rate is much lower. The thing, I guess the one point I want to make about taxes is that I think for too many people broaching planning issues initially, the issue of taxes is viewed as more important to them than it really should be, in my view. It's a real tail wagging the dog problem. I mean, if you have a $2 million estate and you may end up having to pay $150,000 in taxes, you still got a $1.85 million estate to go to your kids, and you really have to think about what is it worth to you in terms of inconvenience, extra cost of setting up and maintaining this tax-saving system, some loss of control and access by the surviving spouse because you have to use trusts and restrictive trusts in this context. So just have a balanced view of it. Some people, the tax issue is more important because their children are, for good reasons, are more dependent on them. It's more important that they have the maximum amount available to leave to their kids. If they have one child and he's disabled, it's a different situation than you're having your kids out and grown and self-sufficient. In terms of how important is it for you to leave that last dollar to the kids? Think about the impact of you and on your spouse during your lifetimes in contrast. Big issue has to do with the concern about mental incapacity. This, again, is not an estate planning topic typically. You don't think of it as an estate planning instrument. But having an appropriate durable power of attorney is really a critical piece of life planning for everybody. If they're coming in to do their first will when they have their first kid, or later in life when it becomes more apparent that they may have this need for support. This is legal and financial decision-making, in the event of incapacity. There are no standard forms for this, and you really need to think through what you're giving and why. Most powers of attorney are very, very broad. There have been court cases involving situations where, in one case, mom, widow, signed a power of attorney, made her daughter the attorney in fact. There was broad gifting powers in this, the power to make gifts on behalf of the elder. Daughter deeded the mom's house to herself, to the daughter herself. Mom went to court, and the judge said, look, you authorized her to do this. She thought she was doing this to protect the house or whatever her thought was. I mean, she had some, rationale for it, which may have been a good rationale, but it wasn't what mom had in mind. So just be careful. Ask questions. Make sure you understand the provisions, especially around gifting powers. That's really the big one. Medical decision-making is, unless you have mechanisms in place to deal with your incapacity, if you have a stroke, have a sudden medical event, or if you're just in slow decline, become less able to really participate in medical decision-making, you need something to pick up that slack, or decisions can't be made. You certainly don't want to get into that situation. Or you don't want to force guardianship. And there is a court procedure to name a decision maker for someone who needs one because of mental illness or intellectual disabilities. But you really don't want to go there. It's a new law. It's progressive in some sense. It's protective. But it's gotten very cumbersome, slow, difficult, technical. The person to be named is entitled to an attorney now. So almost everything ends up being some degree of contested. There's a mandatory court appearance involved in it. the setup is really adversary. It's sort of your kids as petitioner against you as the person in need of guardianship. It's lousy for family dynamics. It's expensive. So the combination of the durable power of attorney and the healthcare proxy will, in most cases, will obviate the need for consideration of guardianship. And that would be reason enough to do it, just to avoid that need. Now, long-term illness. Here we get into the kind of the heart of the financial concern that people have about, all right, now I'm working, I have income, I'm meeting my needs. If I stop working because of illness or injury, there's no new income coming in, I'm not increasing my wealth any longer, I've got to start spending. What am I going to do? How am I going to handle this stuff? I've mentioned this whole array of support services at home and the community and assisted living and all of that. It's all very expensive. So what do I do? I have Medicare, I have MedX, I have my Medicare RX or my prescription drug coverage, I have my basic insurances. Isn't that enough? It's not. I mean, the Medicare, MedX, that whole, the supplementary medical insurance deals primarily with acute illnesses, hospitalizations, relatively short-term periods of rehabilitation after a hospitalization. It provides some degree of home care on an open-ended basis for people who are actually housebound in a technical sense, really can't get out virtually. They let you go to church, the hairdresser, and there are a couple of other places you can go, but it's not for people who need some degree of help, which for most people at home, it's not that they're absolutely housebound. So Medicare is really doesn't do it at all, and MedX, people think of MedX or the Medigap policies, Medicare supplemental policies, really just fill in the gaps in Medicare. It picks up the co-pays and the deductibles, but it doesn't provide any additional service. If Medicare isn't paying for something any longer, then neither will the supplemental policies. So what do we do with the situation at that point? There really are really three alternatives to think through. One is paying for it yourself. One is looking into long-term care insurance. And the third is looking at the other public program that does provide support for long-term care. The main one is Mass Health. There's another in Massachusetts. We have a significant program called the Home Care Program, which is state-operated. But those are our three options. The first option is not an option for everybody, the self-pay option. This is a kind of you go through a financial planning exercise, and sometimes I'll refer a client. I'll say that, look, you really need to have your financial planner look at your situation, because there's a question in my mind about whether you can consider self-pay as an option or not. Nursing home care is $130,000 a year. That's a lot of money. What the extent of your risk of needing that care is something that can be thought about a little bit. I mean, if everybody in your family has died of heart conditions, then open-ended long-term care may not be that much of a risk for you. You're more likely to be one of the people who dies in bed or after a short illness. On the financial side, just as a financial planner can plug in numbers and costs to tell you what you need to save for your children's education, what you need to save for retirement, you can have them put in some more numbers and add in. They could do their actuarial stuff and give you some notion of what it might take to pay for long-term care yourself. And I think to the extent that people can and want to, there are huge advantages to that in terms of control and not having to deal with state systems and state services. For many, many people, it's not an option. There is a category of people at the other end of the wealth spectrum for whom mass health eligibility is going to be something that is quite easy to establish. They may be eligible for it right now if they needed the care. This range of people is actually broader than I think most people envision. I mean, a house, for instance, a married couple, one living in the house, A house does not count as an asset regardless of its value, so that's sort of off the top. If you have retirement accounts and other cash assets, they do count. If you have mortgages or other debts, you can apply your assets against those debts in dealing with this issue. There are strategies that can be used. These are just detailed in the regulations. They're not rocket science, and they're not sleight of hand. Things like there is a role for an immediate annuity in some nursing home cases. There are things that can be done typically with people, with a couple with maybe a house and maybe $400,000 or $500,000 in other assets and no debt, or net assets. That's sort of the range. I mean, people think of Medicaid or Mass Health, it's the same thing. As a poverty program, it really has grown into a kind of a middle class program, at least to that extent. It's important to understand how you can access it and how it can be used. If you're not eligible for it now, whether there are things that you can do now, if you're fairly close to that line, or the things that you can do in the next 5 years, 8 years, before you have a need to get yourself closer to a position where you may be able to get this help. I mean, clearly, if somebody has only that amount of money and it's $130,000 a year for nursing home placement now, then it's really a problem. For many people, long-term care insurance is an option, and Lisa's going to be talking about that in much greater detail. I've got a lot of material in the paper on it as well. Long-term care insurance is something which is relatively new in terms of availability. I mean, it's been around for a while, but hasn't been regulated by the state, and many people are falling within a sort of a netherland of now being too old to get it because their health condition and their age just makes the cost too great. So we're still dealing with a large number of people in that group, but increasingly people in the sort of the next group down, the under 65s. It's kind of prime territory for considering long-term care insurance. And I think that there are something that should be explored. You have to think about the cost implications of it. You have to think about ways, thinking smart about it, think about ways to keep the cost of it down. You have different options, like you did with health. I mean, health insurance back in the old days, you looked for a no deductible policy. You looked for all these things that would absolutely minimize the cost to you. Whereas today, you think of health insurance really as just you need to get what to avoid a catastrophic loss. Not so afraid about a big deductible. You don't want to pay a big deductible, but it's not going to sink your ship. And if the cost is offset enough by a larger deductible, you'll consider it. And you need to think about long-term care insurance in the same way. I mean, if paying privately for 6 months is not going to be total catastrophe for the family, then look at longer deductible policies, longer waiting period policies, and just be smart about it. Just one word on the insurance piece involves there are two global kinds of policies. There are ones that are issued directly by companies, insurance companies like John Hancock and whatnot. And then there are those that you get through groups, AARP and other fraternal organizations, and things you get all these mailings about. The ones sold in Massachusetts by companies are regulated by the State Insurance Commission. The regulations are very tight and very consumer-oriented. And the ones that are sold by the groups are not. They're not subject to state regulation. The federal government has decided that because they're sold nationally, they can't be subject to state regulation, but the federal government has also decided not to regulate them federally. So they're really unregulated. And if you're a real fan of open markets, this may seem like an interesting idea in terms of competition and such, but it's made it very, very hard for people to really get a sense of what the policies really pay, what the provisions are, what gates, we call them gates. They're obstacles to claims, technical requirements about who you can use as a provider. There are just lots of things that you really need to pay a lot of attention to in those policies. And I suggest that people at least use what the state requires of private policies, use that as a kind of at least a basic benchmark in evaluating the group policies that are going to be less expensive, but they may be less expensive because they're not going to pay or pay as much. Last word on this. This is the three things: self-pay, long-term care insurance, or Medicaid is really the kind of the options on paying for long-term care. And the Medicaid, Mass Health, is the state program that does provide for long-term care at home in community settings, a little bit in assisted living for people of low income, and it's really the safety net for everybody on the issues of long-term nursing home care, custodial care in a nursing home. Medicaid, as I say, is really more generous than most people give it credit for. One concern that people often have is whether the quality of their care is going to be less, or they'll be able to get into only less quality facilities. In Massachusetts, at least, we have a unitary system in our nursing homes. We don't have Medicaid nursing homes and private ones. They're all, the private nursing home industry is completely dependent upon Medicaid because at any given time, 50 or 60 or 70% of the beds in all of the nursing homes in the state are paid by Medicaid. It's just too expensive. There aren't that many people who can go in privately and who need it on a long-term basis. So it's going to be St. Patrick's, it's going to be rehab, it's going to all the biggest and the best are going to be Medicaid participants. There are a few kind of more boutique-y homes. There are some homes that don't participate in it, but it's very, very few. Once in the nursing home, there's really, and I've been visiting nursing homes and doing this stuff for over 35 years. And the question always comes up about, well, is mom going to be treated differently if she's in the home? And I said, well, watch it. It's hypothetically possible, but I don't see it. I don't get it reported to me. The Department of Public Health doesn't get it reported. I think the concern is that if a home, and this is out of the home's own business self-interest, if they had a reputation for treating people on Medicaid differently than anyone else, then most of the people who may go in privately for a month or 6 months and then go on to Medicaid won't come because they know they may need Medicaid at some point. And if that's the home's reputation, then the home is dead. So I think maybe I shouldn't really say that. I'm sure part of it is goodwill and because the law says they can't discriminate. But part of it, I think, is just business self-interest. But we really don't have a sense of that problem arising. I think we'll have a chance later to decide we'd kind of combine questions.
Yeah, well, we're going to take questions at the end of Lisa's presentation, which is about to begin. So one word of just a request. Lisa's getting over a bad cold and has had a little coughing, so just bear with her. We're going to keep her going with hot water and tea and lemon, but all right, here you go. This is clicker.
So here we go. And it truly is the end of the cold. You know those spring colds, they come, and the only thing left seemed to be a cough during Dawn's talk, so I apologize, Dawn. So I'm going to talk about long-term care issues, and Dawn took it from the legal point of view and the different things that we can do. I am going to talk about insurance, but I'm also going to talk about what is long-term care and what are the other things that we should be thinking about when we're considering long-term care. And we did a wonderful session last week, the Council for Women of Boston College. We ran a program called Aging Reimagined. And we had a geriatric care nurse practitioner, and we had a geriatric care manager, and we had a thought leader. He's director of an age wave lab, and he came to talk about what the future was going to be for aging, and the cars that are going to somewhat drive themselves, and the little robots that are going to help us take medicines, and all sorts of things. So there's a lot out there, and most of it is being driven by the fact that we're a slightly smarter society these days with technology, but because nearly 71 million out of over 300 million Americans are going to be age 65 and older come 2030. So that's the major thing, and there's an awful lot of people sitting in this room that are going to be a part of that group. So the questions to contemplate is, where are we going to live? What kind of health insurance are we going to have? And I've been talking about, I've had that line for a couple of years, and as we have gone through Obamacare and we look at Medicare and everything else, that's really a question. And then the third is, what are the risks and the cost of a long-term care need? So beginning with long-term care. Long-term care is the type of assistance we need when we need help with activities of daily living. That's it. It's not acute care, as Don said. It is you need help bathing, dressing, going to the bathroom. Now, you may need that help because you're physically incompetent, not incompetent is the wrong word, but physically unable to do it, or you may need it because of a cognitive issue, and therefore you forget how to do some of these things. People age 65 face a 70% chance of needing some type of care. Now, mind you, some of that could be for 2 months or 1 month, and some of it could be for 10 years. But there is a 40% chance that we will spend some time in a nursing home. And the good news is it's less and less, because more and more care is being delivered at home and in assisted living facilities, and through the advent of things such as adult day centers, different places that we can access care, and I'm going to talk more about them. And then the last thing that's really driven this is there has been a huge change in mortality rates. My parents are 88 and 85 years old. One of them needs care, the other doesn't. Both of them are in good health. Now, neither one of their parents survived past one grandparent survived past 82. The more educated and the healthier you are at 65, the longer you tend to live, and our mortality is ballooning. So when you're planning for long-term care, one of the things is talking with people. And part of our program last week was, we first started, before we got to Aging Reimagined, which we thought was a better title, we started with, have you had the conversation? And that conversation, if you're younger and still have parents, is with your parents. If you're thinking about it for yourselves, it's with your spouse or your children. What is it that you want for long-term care? So we're going to talk about that. How can you provide it without worrying about money? Don gave a really good overview of the 3 things that you can do. You can pay for it yourself, you can qualify for some government programs, or you can purchase some insurance for it. All 3 of those are extremely viable alternatives if you plan ahead. The problem comes, and I'm sure Don would agree, is when the stroke has happened and the person's going into the nursing home, and now you start to think about it. So planning for it takes some of this worry off the table. And then I am sure in this room there are people who have cared for parents, or who have cared for spouses, or even children. And you know the emotional, physical, and financial toll that it can take on you. I used to talk about this, I've been doing this since '94, until I went through it with my parents, I had no idea how all-encompassing it can be. Oh, one other thing, and I don't want to get away from this. There are more family disputes over how to care for mom than many other things out there. So one of the things by doing your planning, and I beg of you, do not say to one child over everybody else, whatever you do, don't put me in a nursing home. Because what that puts on that child then is a real burden to make sure that you get the best care, and maybe the best care would be, hopefully, in the better nursing homes to come. So just be be careful of the conversation. So when do you begin planning for it? Well, it comes as a shock to many people when I say around 50 years old. You don't have to be in good health to plan for it. You have to be in good health to be sure you have all the options. And the other part of it is, even if you're going to self-insure, when you get older, when you're 80 or 85, I just said to Lindsay, my parents have recently moved into a community care, CCRC, Community Care Retirement Community, continuing care retirement community. And my father knows they need to be there, knows the care is wonderful for my mother. They have an independent 2-bedroom apartment, but he's not that happy to be surrounded by everybody of his own age. And I said, Dad, your birthday was last month and you turned 88. And there's a lot to be said for it. We all like it. I mean, you come to a college, you feel young, you walk into BC. You see the kids, you go back, you think about it. There are issues. So the older you get, it's sometimes difficult if it's the first time you're thinking about it. Obviously, if you've got children at home and you've got college expenses and you've got all sorts of things, your minds are wrapped around other things. You've got to be somewhat free of these thoughts. But it's this age range, 50 to 65, is a really key time. If you're self-employed or own a business, you've got some options, which I'm going to talk about. And certainly, and I love more and more attorneys are doing this, but not as thoroughly as Dawn does during your estate retirement planning. That's the time to bring it up. So the planning discussion questions, what are we thinking about? Well, what is your family medical and longevity history? As Dawn mentioned, the heart issue. Well, what if your family history is very good and they live to be 92 or 88, as my father is? We are seeing that unless we have adopted worse habits than our parents, people are living 5 to 10 years longer than their parents. The number one need for long-term care is old age. So therefore, the longer you live, the greater the chance you have of needing long-term care. If it is needed, where do you want to receive it? And let's put it on the table right now. Nobody wants to go to a nursing home, and we know that. But do you want to receive it at home? If you're going to be at home by yourself and have somebody come in a couple hours a day, are you going to be isolated? Might an assisted living facility be better, where the care is a step-down version? It's more residential. You can have a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio and have a lot of your needs taken care of. Or we have other kinds of things going on now, which again I'll get into more, but like the Beacon Hill Village. That's a program that started here in Boston that's being copied all over the country. And people in apartments in Beacon Hill didn't want to leave. So they formed this association and they get all kinds of services from it in their home. And location, that's a really important thing. If you are in Florida and your children are in Massachusetts, or vice versa, when you need long-term care, it's really helpful to have somebody around that you can count on and you can depend upon. Now, speaking of that, notice I said someone. Are the children capable? Do you have relatives? If not, who do you turn to? Advisors are one, geriatric care coordinators or care managers. That's a booming business right now. And one of the things I advise with a care manager is meet that care manager before you need care. Establish a relationship. And then finally, in your planning discussion questions, where are you going to pay for this? What assets have you got set aside? Because everybody's got a plan, even if they haven't done it. And the major plan is that we're going to pay out of our retirement savings. So which ones? And put those, if you do intend to self-pay, make sure they're in a place that they're going to be there. So when we look at financial issues, we look at repositioning or designating certain assets. It was a lot easier to do this when we were making 4% on a CD. And you could put money away and you could say, that's my money, but you still need that safe money. Long-term care insurance I am going to talk about, and I'm not going to ask the group, but I'll assume that there are some people here who have long-term care insurance. I'm seeing heads nodding. I'll tell you a couple of things to go back and look at your own policy, if you don't remember the details. Reverse mortgages are there, they are available. Go into them very carefully. And Dawn may actually be able to speak to that a little bit better. They seemed like they were going to be the panacea, but a lot of people have gotten in trouble with them. Now, here is something that I talk about. And I have seen it, I have lived it with my clients, with my parents. Updating or securing your advisor relationships. My doctor is currently 10 years older than me, and I'm in my 50s. And she says to me, Lisa, I'm going to keep you. You're an easy one. I'm going to start cutting back. And I'm saying to myself, do I really want to be kept until I become not easy? And then I have to start all over with somebody brand new? So I'm saying to her, listen, you know, the new person that starts to take over, I'll go to her and you. I want a younger. Not because I don't trust older, but if she's planning on retiring, I want to make sure somebody's going to be there. Your attorney. My attorney is also 68, 69. I mean, that's so common. You went to somebody older when you started. But he has a succession plan, as I'm sure many do. And so that's all you want to do, is make sure that there's going to be somebody coming afterwards. You don't want to start brand new at 80 years old. Private bankers, trust offices, financial advisors, now's the time to get serious. If you're like me, I put off meeting with them. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll see you next year, blah, blah, blah. You need to develop that relationship, and if they're not right for you now, it's time to change. Or again, find out who the successor is. And then this care manager, and for anybody in the room who is currently dealing with a situation, who may be having a difficult time navigating this journey, I put on here, I don't know if you have my handouts. Do you have my slides? Oh, good. Caremanager.org. And there are some wonderful ones here in Massachusetts. But these are people, most of them will talk to you for an hour over the telephone, help you to understand what they can do, give you a little bit of advice. If you decide to hire them, they're typically about $85 to $100 an hour, but they know the world of long-term care. And they can save you so many costly mistakes. So care managers are a really, really wonderful thing as long as you get the right one. So looking at, again, planning for long-term care, now residential. Residential is just about, I mean, besides having money, it is where are you going to live. And I have seen more people selling the Victorian home with sometimes there are still old homes that don't have a bathroom on the first floor, or a shower at least. And they get to a point they can no longer live there. So really, it is beginning to think about where are you going to live. Condo versus standalone. If you're in a standalone, can you have a bedroom and a bathroom on the first floor? How difficult is the gardening, the stairs? I live in a brownstone in Charlestown. I mean, I had 3 floors, half bath on the first floor. Not a place for long-term care. But these are things to think about as you go forward. And in my complex, I have 2 areas of flats. So I think, oh, if I stay here, I could go there. The village model, that's the Beacon Hill Village community I was talking about. Wellesley has it. I'm sure some of you know that there are others around here. I'm not exactly sure. But that is, you pay a fee, $100 to $300 a year. And you get plugged into recommended people to help, rides, assistance with medications, the right painter to bring over, somebody to come change a light bulb. That's, in Beacon Hill, that's exactly what it gets to. So you get some of those services, some you have to pay for, some you just get as a part of it. It's a wonderful thing. Look in your community if there is a village model, and use Beacon Hill Village as your Google search. Continuing care retirement communities, that's where my parents are. There's a number of them around here, Fox Hill and Westwood. My parents are in Edgewood up in North Andover. There's Linden Ponds. There's a bunch of them. And those are independent living with usually 1 or 2 dining rooms. You choose from it. You get one meal. It's white linen cloth service. In my parents, I have a bistro. No tablecloths in the bistro, and I actually prefer the bistro. But good food, a choice, all kinds of activities. If you need care, it's there at a pull of a button. But you are not getting care as a regular basis. Average age in these places is over the age of 80. And one of the problems, but it's also a benefit, is that, and this kind of goes to my father's point, he's so impressed when he meets the 105-year-old and the 102-year-old, but then he says, Lisa, I'm here with 105-year-olds and 102-year-olds. So what happens is they're living that to that age because they have good nutrition, easy access to exercise programs, social stimulation, all of the things that they tell us we need. So the people who move to continuing care retirement communities end up with greater longevity than people who often stay at home. So, what causes the need for long-term care? Besides, as I said, number one, growing old, the number one actual claim from the insurance companies is stroke. Number 2 is dementia. Number 3 is arthritis. And that's not the aches and pains we all have in our fingers or something like this. Rheumatoid arthritis, arthritis which has really caused people the inability to dress, to do certain things because their hands just aren't working or they can't bend down to their feet. Inability to dress for long-term care is, can they put their shoes on, can they button their clothes? Things of that nature. Cancer is actually a pretty big cause of it, but it's a very short term. Typically, if somebody needs the kind of chronic care that we call long-term care from cancer, it's not for that long a period of time. And then finally, there are accidents. So injuries of some sort, car accidents, but probably the number one is falls. I don't have the most uplifting part of the program, and we can try to keep it light. Sometimes I'm better than others. I don't think I'm keeping it light enough today. But again, planning for this when we don't need it is the best time. So the average cost of long-term care. Today, in your home, I put in $39,000. Well, what it is it's about $25 an hour to bring a home health aide into your home. And most people who are receiving this kind of care receive it somewhere between 4 and 8 hours a day. So this is 5 hours a day, 6 days a week. That's what the $39,000 does. Because usually there's somebody else in the home, and they can provide some of the care. Now, obviously, if you needed round-the-clock care in your home, $25 an hour for 24 hours a day would be much higher. I will say that what often happens when people do get 24-hour day care in their home, they negotiate prices so that they're not as high. Now, and then nursing homes today, 132,000 in 2012 in the greater Boston area. In Massachusetts, it doesn't get much lower than that, but you can get it down a little bit. But none of you are facing nursing homes today, or even home health care. So really the cost is when you need it. So you have to take into account inflation. And so if we look at a 3% inflation rate, which right now seems pretty high, but actually is not high for nursing homes. Nursing homes have been increasing at about a 5% rate. Excuse me. Whereas home health care has only been increasing at about a 1 to 2% rate. And part of that is because the sicker people are going to nursing homes now. Healthier people are staying home longer, going to assisted living facilities, going to adult daycare. And so nursing homes are getting sicker people, therefore their costs are going up higher. But in the year 2032, that $132,000, if it increases at 3%, is going to be $310,000 a year. So those are some of the numbers you have to think about when you're planning for this. Don talked about this, so I won't go too far into it, but as he said, Medicare and group health insurance, they pay a little bit, but very little. Thank you so much. It's the heat that makes the difference. The water cools down. Medicare will pay up to 100 days in a nursing home. And so if you do have somebody who goes in or who's going to need it, work with the system, get those 3 months paid for. Medicare will also pay for skilled care in the home if you are homebound, as Don said, and it's been prescribed by your doctor. That, they will even pay a little bit of the chronic care, which is the bathing and dressing. I have to tell you, they're kind of cheap with that. They'll say, well, she only needs a shower 3 times a week. I mean, that's like, everybody wants a shower every day, most people. So that's what Medicare pays for. Medicaid, I'll have to change my slide. I'm saying impoverished or somewhat middle class, up to $500,000, as Don said, if things are set in place. People with assets pay for it themselves, and then there's private long-term care insurance. So we're going to now begin to talk about what is the insurance, how do you design programs, and what are some of the costs for it. So long-term care insurance doesn't pay for acute care. It pays for the chronic care needs. It pays for an individual who needs help with activities of daily living or has dementia. So it is the #1 payer outside of people with their own money of home health aides. It pays for assisted living facilities, nursing home facilities, hospice. Most policies will pay to help modify your home, enlarge a bathroom, put in a ramp, do different things. The one thing that long-term care insurance and claimants have in common is they both want to keep, the insurance company and the claimant both want to stay at home. And so the insurance companies will go out of their way to have you stay at home. My mother's policy right now, her Medicare physical therapy ran out, and now the long-term care insurance is paying for her physical therapy in the home. So there's different things that they will do to help people stay at home. And many of the policies, especially today's policies, will pay for that care manager, up to usually $1/3 of your monthly benefit. So that could be $2,000, $3,000 in a year to pay for that care manager. So those of you who have a policy, that's one of the things to look in your language. Does it pay for care management? And be aware that you have that. As I said, the way that you trigger these policies, and for those of you who have it, it's still pretty much this. They could be a little bit different. HIPAA came out and defined the way that you trigger policies. And basically they say without substantial assistance, a loss of ability to perform, in other words, you cannot do 2 activities of daily living without help. Substantial assistance is typically defined as hands-on or standby. And that standby can be supervisory. So if we're afraid that my mother's going to slip getting in the shower, that is an inability to perform an activity of daily living. And then the second is that you have, and HIPAA used the word severe cognitive impairment that results in a threat to you or to someone else. Not being able to find your way home is a severe cognitive impairment. Being afraid someone's going to leave the stove on because they've walked away and forgotten they put it on is a severe cognitive impairment. And then all insurance companies now, under HIPAA, require that a plan of care be developed by a licensed health care practitioner. Can be your doctor, can be a care manager, can be a social worker, can be a person of your choice, not the insurance companies. So when you're looking at designing these policies, you have a lot of choices. And this, I go back to the people who have insurance already in force, particularly if you bought group insurance. Because many people, I meet them all the time, they bought it 10 years ago, and they think I have coverage, but they've forgotten the details because that's, I mean, I don't know what's in my homeowner's policy. You know, we look at these things. So you look at your monthly amount, and you can buy anywhere in Massachusetts from $1,500 to $15,000 a month. Now remember, we said a nursing home cost $130,000 or about $11,000, $12,000 a month. Assisted living facilities cost somewhere between $6,000 and $7,500. Well, the average policy sold in Massachusetts is somewhere between $6,000 and $7,500 per month. Now, yes, if you go into a nursing home, you will be supplementing it. But the chances are that you will be receiving the care in a lot lower a cost place before you get to the nursing home, and then you supplement when you get to the nursing home. Naturally, you can buy as much as you can, but we're trying to keep premiums reasonable. Then you have a benefit pool. So you can buy 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, up to 10 years. You used to be able to buy unlimited. They don't offer those anymore. So what that means is, let's say you bought, let's make it easy on me, $3,000 a month for 2 years. That means you bought $72,000 of coverage. Now, if you didn't use it up in 2 years, it goes until you use up your $72,000. But 2 years is kind of how you define it. Then you go, and by the way, the average policy is a 4-year benefit period. The average need for long-term care is 3 years. Then you take these policies and you say, okay, well, I'm going to buy this $3,000 or $7,000 or $6,000, but I'm not going to need it for 30 years. So they have inflation options. And that is unfortunately where the expense really comes in. If you buy an insurance policy without inflation, then it's pretty reasonable. But taking into account inflation is what drives up the premiums. So it used to be, the gold standard used to be a 5% compound inflation rider. That is still available, and it is quite costly. 3% compounded has become the norm now. And it somewhat goes, it doesn't somewhat, it goes along with most of the inflationary increases that we're seeing in long-term care, except for nursing homes. There's another kind, CPI indexed. And that's comparable to the price for 3% compound, where it's pegged to CPI. Right now, that's not so attractive, because CPI is not doing very much. But Ben Bernanke is speaking today. Who knows? We could get the limits taken off our inflation fighting. So those are the 3 ways that you can do it. Another great way of buying these policies, if you're part of a couple, and a couple means 2 people who share expenses and have a commitment to each other. So it does not have to be your typical husband and wife. Shared benefits. You buy a 2-year benefit policy or a 4-year benefit policy, and your partner buys the same policy. You use up all 2 years of yours. Your partner says, okay, we're going to keep the assets for me to use in case I need it, but here you can use my policy. Or one of you dies and never used your policy, all the benefits go to the surviving spouse. It only adds about 10% to the cost of the premium, Well, actually, at 2 years, it adds a little more. But at a 4-year benefit period, 4 and 4, it only adds about 10%. And it enables you to buy a little less because you can share your benefits. And it's more of an asset protection or an estate protection play. And then finally, I'm going to give you the bad news is, the good news is your age is always guaranteed. If you buy it at 60, you'll always be 60. But your premium is not guaranteed. And the insurance companies do have the right to raise the premiums. And from 1994 until 2004, I used to say they have the right to raise the premiums, but they never do. I definitely do not say that anymore. They have raised premiums. We have seen premiums go up, on average, on an in-force policy, about 20%. We've seen some go up as much as 50%. So they can. The higher ones were typically on policies that were sold at really low premiums. This is a new policy, new coverage. In the insurance world, remember, the insurance world started with Lloyd's of London and doing the ships way back when Isabella and everybody else was sending them out. That's how insurance started. So it's been around for hundreds of years. Long-term care insurance has been around for 30. So they're still learning things. And one of the things that they missed is that the person who typically buys long-term care insurance is an affluent, educated, not so much affluent, but educated, has enough money to buy it, certainly gets good health care, therefore they live longer, therefore there's more claims. I mean, it's almost counterintuitive there. So do go into this knowing that your premiums can be increased. There is a ceiling. And Don alluded to some of the group coverages are not covered by the state. All individual policies are under state guidelines, and the state has to approve any premium increases. So what will it cost you? So I ran this for ages 50 through 70, and I have single and marital and spousal discounts here. Single people, if you buy this policy and you live alone, it's going to cost you the most money. And that is not a prejudice against single people. It is if there's another person with you, your need for long-term care will be delayed. So therefore, if you are 50 and you're single and buying this policy, it costs you about $2,800. If you're married and you're 50 and your spouse is 55, it's going to cost you around $2,200 for the 50-year-old and $2,400 for the 55-year-old. So these are the prices going through age 70. And by the way, this is for a $7,500 a month benefit, or a total pool for 4 years of benefits, total pool of $360,000, increasing every single year at 3% compounded. So your $7,500 increases, your $360,000 increases. Your premiums do not increase due to the inflation rider. They could increase because the insurance company and the state decides they should increase, but they do not increase due to the inflation rider. 75, 80 years, this insurance pretty much can't be bought after age 79. And once you get into 75 and closer to 80, we often take off the inflation rider. I just did a woman who was 76 years old. It was $15,000. She bought $9,000 a month with no inflation. So it just gives you a premium. If you own a business, employer-paid premiums are tax deductible. They are income tax-free to employees of the corporations, and your claim dollars are received tax-free. If you just buy it on your own or you're self-employed, then you are subject to these index long-term care premiums of 2013, and it goes by your age. Every year they change. If you're a partner or you own a sub-S corporation or something like that, these amounts are completely tax deductible for you and your spouse or partner. If you are a pure individual, you have to qualify for the medical deduction in order to get these. And that was in excess of 7.5%. I heard rumors it was going to 10%. I'm not sure. So the last thing, I'm starting to speed it up because I'm looking at my time, but we'll have time for questions. There's one other kind of insurance out there, and it's called a linked benefit. And what this is it's a combination of life insurance or annuity and long-term care. Now, there's not many annuities in Massachusetts, so therefore I'm just going to focus on the life insurance. But basically, this is a female who's 60 years old. She has a 6-year benefit period for long-term care. She's paying $100,000, single time, into a policy. And a lot of people have old life insurance policies that might have this kind of value in it, or they have a money market account or something that they're not earning anything on. So they take this $100,000, they put it into this policy, they never need long-term care, they die, their beneficiaries get $170,000. They need long-term care, they get $7,000 a month, it's paid out for 6 years, they end up getting a return from that policy of $504,000. The female age 60 changes her mind. She decides to move in with her niece, says, I need the money to build my in-law apartment, give me back my money. It's 20 years from now, I get $125,000. So this kind of coverage has come about for people who say, what if I never need long-term care? I just paid all that money and I might not get anything back. This is another alternative. So the top 10 tips when thinking about long-term care is, number one, no one thinks you're ever going to need it. Your spouse may need it, but you're not going to need it. Number two, stay married or find a partner willing to help. Number three, and this is a serious one, move someplace where you can age in place when you're still capable of doing it and forming new friends and new social relationships. If you are considering long-term care insurance, by all means, if there's some corporate dollars there, use them. Plan to self-insure part of the risk. That's that $7,500, and then you pay the nursing home cost. That really keeps your premium down. Buy inflation protection. If money is really an issue, you want as much monthly benefit, lower benefit years. So buy $9,000 and a 2-year benefit period versus $5,000 and a 4-year benefit period. I'm sorry, I know I'm going through this quickly, but I'm just trying to give you the overall. Buy it as young and healthy as you can. There are preferred health discounts. Share your benefit pools if you're partnered. And number 10, exercise your body, exercise your brain. It's your best bet to delay needing long-term care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Don. So now we're going to begin the Q&A portion of the program. I'm sure there are lots of questions out there, so just going to give Lisa a moment to get her mic on. But if folks could raise their hand, we're going to have someone going around with a microphone so that questions can be heard by the whole audience. And so if you can raise your hand and let us know if you have a question, that would be great. Okay, we'll start back there. Courtney will be coming around and getting to you, so be persistent.
Lisa, one of your tips is use corporate dollars if available. What do you mean by corporate dollars?
Okay, am I on?
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Corporate dollars is if there is a business, if you have your own business, or if your boss provides it. What we typically see in larger firms is that there's a lot of executive benefit planning done, where the corporation will carve out the top officers or reward for length of service. If they're paying, then it is tax deductible and you don't need to pick it up as premium. If you have your own business, then you can deduct part of your premium under your health insurance deduction.
Okay, we'll take the gentleman in the denim shirt there.
Yeah, I have a question regarding if you have pre-existing health conditions, are there certain conditions I would assume that would, just like typical health insurance that would preclude you from buying your own insurance. With Obamacare kicking in, is that going to change?
No, Obamacare is not going to affect long-term care insurance because long-term care insurance is individual private care. But as far as pre-existing conditions, you are right, but they're not always the ones you would think. For instance, heart issues, cancer, all of that in people's medical history is not a problem. Things that are more of a problem are things like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, and any hint of dementia. Diabetes, controlled diabetes is certainly one that can be underwritten, but they'll look at how long have people had it, how much insulin are they taking, and are there any comorbid experiences with it.
Gentleman in the green, Jack?
Yeah, you mentioned, you both referenced Massachusetts programs and Massachusetts regulations. What about if we're from Rhode Island or New Hampshire or, Florida or wherever?
Hey, with regard to long-term care insurance, most states, certainly Rhode Island and Florida, have state insurance commissions that will have regulations about dealing with the private policy issues. The group coverage is not regulated by anybody still, right? There's no federal agency either.
That is correct. What they do often, though, fall under HIPAA.
Yeah. So there will be what you should do, just Google it, for the state. There'll be some consumer protection regulations either in the insurance commission or whatever it's called in that state, or often in the Attorney General's office as a part of their consumer protection.
Okay, and you had mentioned the national organizations like AARP have programs and offerings like this. Is it better to be buying in group sizes, or is this like an individual assessment of your insurance need? Like when you can get a group policy, you're usually getting a better pricing. So could you talk to that?
You can speak to the pricing issue. The personal issues the private policies are going to be more expensive, I think, by and large. But maybe you can speak better to that.
AARP sells Genworth's long-term care insurance premium, and it's the exact same premium that's sold on the individual market. Group policies typically will have a 5% discount off of the premiums. And that seems to be the average. It used to be 10%. But sometimes group policies actually can cost more money. And the reason is because, and by the way, they barely sell group anymore. But so the kind that he was talking about with the fraternal organizations and all of that, that's the 5% discount. But real group offered by Mass General Hospital or Boston College, it would be guaranteed issue. So because it was guaranteed issue, these pre-existing conditions would be covered, so therefore they charged a premium for them.
Yes, here in the green shirt.
This also refers to other states. My understanding is that some states have what they call a partnership program that has to do with asset protection and the whole Medicaid thing. I'm assuming that the reason Massachusetts doesn't have that is because we already have Obamacare type guaranteed health insurance, or not guaranteed, but required health insurance. So we have things like Mass Health. Are you anticipating that with the advent of Obamacare, more states will change that and offer those kinds of partnership programs?
Now, I need to back up a step because it's the same, really some of the same confusion noted earlier. The health care insurance is the Obamacare, and this partnership issue has to do with Medicaid nationally. And it's not really part of the health insurance picture at all. It predated it, and it's not. Now, this does vary very much from state to state. Massachusetts does have one. It did predate the federal program, but it has nothing to do with Obamacare. And the state programs vary widely. But what they're based on is the idea that if you have a certain level of long-term care insurance, then there is some protection at your death in the context of estate recovery programs that the state may have. I mentioned earlier that if you have a house, the state won't make you sell your house. You can go onto Medicaid despite owning a house. If the house is in your own name at your death and it's part of your estate, the state at that point can come back and make a claim for reimbursement. If you're married and you've shifted it to your wife, that doesn't happen. But if you get stuck with it in your name at your death, there's an estate recovery claim. If you have, in Massachusetts, if you have long-term care insurance, really in a minimal amount, it's $125 a day for 2 years. If you have that level of insurance coverage, then and certain other requirements are met, at your death, the state will waive its claim, won't make the claim for reimbursement. There have been some recent changes in the state program. The state program in Massachusetts is really much more generous than the one that's part of the federal Medicaid program. I don't know whether ours is going to get changed to the federal. There's a lot of pressure about that. And the national program is based on the idea that to the extent that you've actually made claims on your policy and have drawn money out, your estate recovery claim is reduced by that amount. But just by the, it might be the $100,000 or the $150,000 that you've pulled out. But there's no automatic exclusion. So that's going to vary also from state to state. It may not call it a partnership program. The states don't have to. It's just, it has to do with the state estate recovery program under Medicaid. That's where you need to look.
I think we have a question right back there.
If one purchased long-term care insurance about 15 years ago when working in New York City, can one add your wife currently, or is that have to be done at a much earlier time?
You can add a spouse at any point in time. You're not, what you're actually doing is just buying an individual policy for your spouse, as long as she is in good health. The policy that you bought 15 years ago, I would venture to say, is probably no longer for sale because the policies have changed so much. But that does not stop your wife from buying a policy. And by the way, just you bought a policy in New York City, unless it's a policy I never heard of, anywhere you buy the policy, it covers you anywhere within the United States. And wherever you bought the policy, it's those rules that govern.
Okay, over here in the blue blazer. Just wait for the microphone if you can, please.
Would you speak to the matter of major insurance companies who are getting out of the business, Metropolitan, Prudential, and they still say that a lot of their policyholders that have policies written, but what is the future as far as that kind of a situation if you're in that situation?
Sure thing.
Let me just jump in and repeat the question so that everyone can hear it. The question is about insurance policies held with companies that may have gone out of business since or may go out of business in the future between now and the time when you need to go on claim.
This is a really important question. Thank you for bringing it up. I'll start with the fact that my mother is claiming under a traveler's policy. They got out of the business 10 years ago. I own Met and Unum. They got out of the business. Prudential recently got out of the business. This, as I said, is a newer insurance policy. So many insurance companies aren't quite sure how to deal with it. It is also, and I won't get into the weeds, a very high capital reserve type of policy. So for every policy they put on the books, they have to reserve a lot of money. So similar to annuities, insurance companies go in and out of long-term care. And insurance companies go in and out of annuities. Insurance companies get out of life insurance, but they still have those policyholders on the books. That's the nature of insurance companies. So what they do is they segregate off the block and they begin to administer it under regular claims. And it's business as usual as far as we brokers are concerned. And in most cases, it's business as usual where the policyholders are concerned. Where it is a problem is when the insurance company went out of the business and also went into financial trouble. That's where it becomes a problem. And we have seen some from the very early days of these policies. But the ones that you mentioned, the ones that I mentioned, those are large, robust insurance companies that have been around for well over 100, 150 years, and it's just one more silo of policyholders that they are servicing. You're welcome.
Right here in the green shirt, and then we'll come over to you in the blue shirt.
Driving around in the car, I hear these ads on the radio all the time, and I won't name the companies, but you know who they are, saying that even if your loved one is already in the nursing home, we can save their assets from the nursing home. Since they don't have the benefit of the 5-year transfer at that point, what are they doing to do that, and what are the pros and cons?
What they're doing, I haven't gone to those talks. We've tried to speculate and think what might be involved in those cases. We certainly deal with many situations where a person going into the nursing home now can be put onto Medicaid, despite not making any transfers. I mean, we look at a number of things. We look at the residents. This housing exemption is a powerful tool. It may be that the condo that the person is living in now, or the spouse is living in, is non-countable asset. We think about whether residential alternatives for the spouse at home might make sense. If the couple is renting currently, we might have them consider taking some of the cash that's going to make them ineligible and buy a house with it. And when thinking about buying a house, wouldn't have bought a house otherwise, but if they can basically protect $400,000 or $500,000 in buying a house, it may be worth considering. People have debts. Often, they have a first mortgage may be paid off, they may be carrying a high equity line of credit. Payment of a debt, even at the last minute, is not considered a transfer for Medicaid eligibility. So people may come in with excess assets, but we see through various vehicles, those are two major ones. Another vehicle that we will use involves immediate annuities. And I think this is probably what's mostly involved with these talks. Because very often the talks, they're really selling annuities. That's what, if you go to the talk and listen to them, that's what they're going to be talking about. Immediate annuity is an arrangement with an insurance company where you give them a lump sum of money and they agree to pay you back, or your spouse back, a fixed amount every month for a specified period of time. You know that in advance. It might be 3 years or 5 years. It might be for life, but with a guarantee period of 5 years. There are all different ways of structuring it in this, you deal with this as well. Annuities the use of annuities in the context of Medicaid are covered by the regulations. There are criteria that are spelled out as to when and whether you can use these things effectively. We find them most useful in situations where there is a married couple, where one is in the nursing home and one is at home, and they have excess assets. What we can do is shift assets to the community spouse, to the well spouse. That's allowed. The community spouse then can use excess assets to buy an annuity. She's taking a lump sum of savings and making it into a stream of income. Not really losing anything. It's going to come back to her on a monthly basis. Under the Medicaid regulations, income that comes to the community spouse has no impact on Medicaid eligibility. So we've basically taken an asset that's made them ineligible as a couple, moved it to the community spouse, used it to buy an annuity, and then we can achieve eligibility. Now, the regulations don't have a cap on the amount of money. And my hunch is that this is what they're getting at, about they can do this with anybody. The regulations don't say that you can buy an annuity, but not with more than $500,000 or not with more than $300,000. There's no number on it. We're cautious about this. I mentioned that, if we're dealing with an estate of a house plus $400,000 or something like that, an annuity plus some constructive spend down, renovations on the house, doing things that are in the house that are going to be needed anyway, you just haven't gotten around to it. There are lots of things that you can do constructively to use the money in a way that's going to be helpful longer term. When we get the period of time, ideally you'd like to get the annuity back quickly because you're getting a very, very low rate of return on it. You're really not doing it for investment purposes. You want to get it back so you can do whatever you want with it. There's a cap on the amount of assets that the community spouse can have, but only at the time of Medicaid eligibility. So the fact that money's coming back to her and it's accumulating it's now $115,000 is the cash level at the time of eligibility. But she can accumulate beyond that. She can even resell the house again beyond that and have it in cash after eligibility. So we'd like to get it back sooner, but the sooner you get it back, the higher the level of monthly income. And what we're concerned about, I think what most people who are looking at this stuff responsibly are concerned about, is that this annuity regulation was not just some gift from the state. It wasn't they're just being very generous. It was part of an array of regulations that were intended to avoid spousal impoverishment, in the words of the federal law. It was the same one that said that we're not going to take the house, and you can keep $115,000. It's part of that whole set of regulations. It's part of the community spouse can have as much income as she wants and needs, and we're not going to take her income. She can live on that. And our concern is that if you get too large an annuity, have it come back too quickly, it's going to be very clear that you're not doing this to protect the community spouse. If you had $1 million annuity and you got it back in a year, nobody needs $100,000 a month, income to get by. And these cases just aren't going to work. So that really is the only thing. We don't use annuities with individuals. The problem with an individual is that you don't have the asset that's making you ineligible. You've got all this income coming back. And the income's just going to the nursing home. Maybe the income amount is lower than what the Medicaid rate would be, and Medicaid is kicking in a small amount. That's possible. But there's no advantage. I mean, all the money that you put in is going toward the nursing home placement. Medicaid might be paying something, but it's not saving you any money. So I don't know. Maybe I should go to the talk.
Okay, I think we had a question right over here. Right, Michael?
Yes. Lisa, would you speak a little bit more about the advantages and disadvantages of this single solution option?
Oh, sure. And Lindsay, this woman in the turquoise has been trying to get your attention for a while. So
yeah, well, Michael was...
thought I'd speak up for you.
Thank you. We'll get you next.
The advantage to the combination of a life insurance and a long-term care policy is that you're never going to lose your premium. You're going to get it back in some way. So if you have what they call lazy money sitting in a life insurance policy that you no longer need that life insurance policy, or money sitting in a money market that you've just said, I've set aside $100,000 or $200,000 to pay for long-term care needs, then it's a fairly viable solution. The disadvantage is it's insurance, and insurance companies still need to make their profit and get their return on equity and the whole bit. So they're paying in any event. They're going to pay if you die, they're going to pay if you surrender, and they're going to pay if you claim. So therefore, it is a more expensive way of buying long-term care insurance if you need the long-term care insurance. So it's a good arrangement for some people, but it's not, most people don't have that kind of money lying around, or if they do, if they look at, I mean, you can actually even buy a long-term care insurance policy, even though it gets more complicated, a long-term care insurance policy and a life insurance separately for less money. But it is really neat and a nice package.
Okay, right here to the woman who's been waiting patiently.
I probably should know the answer to this question, but I'm a retired Massachusetts teacher, so I'm not eligible for Medicare. Would I be eligible for Medicaid?
Yes.
Oh.
This is with Medicaid eligibility. Yeah, no, just being a resident in Massachusetts, it's...
And my other question, if I move to Brooksby, how does it work when you get ill? The increase in, it goes up when you have to go to the assisted part of it?
Right.
Yeah.
Brooksby Village is another one of these continuing care retirement communities. I think it's a rental one. Is that right?
Oh,
you buy in?
Yeah.
And then, right. I'm not that familiar. I'm not familiar with all of them. The two I'm most familiar with are Edgewood and Fox Hill. But your monthly amount in these places range anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a month. And in some of them, it stays the same. For example, Edgewood. It doesn't matter. They call it a life care community. Fox Hill, on the other hand, has a slightly lower monthly amount while you're independent living, but when you move to their nursing home, which is Clark House, you're now paying $10,000 or $11,000 a month. So I'm not familiar with Brooksby. That's a question to ask. If you need to move to the care facilities, how does that affect your monthly benefit? Now, if you have long-term care insurance, the long-term care insurance will pay when you move into that facility, or if you receive home health services within your apartment.
Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe we will take, we're almost at time, so we'll take 2 more questions, and then afterwards, if you still have more, Lisa and Don, you can get their cards, or maybe they have time for a couple of questions. So we'll go one over there and then one right here.
Very quick question for Lisa. On your slide, the cost of long-term care insurance, the column marital and spousal, is that per person or per couple?
It's per person, so it would be 2 50-year-olds, right. Per year, that's an annual premium,
And then we had a question here in the front row. Courtney's bringing the microphone.
I'm a nurse at an unnamed Harvard teaching hospital, and I have a question about Medicaid. It seems to me that Medicaid is used for patients who, when they come in, they have no money. So the taxpayer subsidizes Medicaid. And then with irrevocable trust, people who can have tons of money can hide that money to be in nursing homes, again, paid for by Medicaid and the taxpayers. So when is Medicaid going to just collapse under the weight of this? Like when, or when are, for instance, it's going to collapse because taxpayers like me are just going to leave Massachusetts when I retire because I'm tired of the high taxes I have to pay.
Let me try that one.
Thank you. Great policy question.
I mean, there's several ways of approaching that from a public policy point of view. We're the only, what we call ourselves, civilized country in the world that doesn't have long-term care built into its basic entitlement for elders and people with disabilities. So people who are struggling with this system are dealing with a makeshift situation to do the best they can for those individuals who should be, in my public policy view, should be covered by the basic Medicare coverage as they are everywhere else in the world. On this issue, the Time magazine used to do a thing almost every year. They talk about millionaires on Medicaid or millionaires in Medicaid. And I swear, I've been doing this for a long, long time. People with a lot of money have no interest in going onto Medicaid. They have no interest in turning over their assets and their businesses to their kids so that they can go onto Medicaid. It just doesn't happen that way. People who are interested in protecting assets are in very vulnerable situations themselves. The protection is for their spouse and for their kids, very often kids with special needs. They will take advantage of the fact that there are these provisions that do allow them to set aside money and protect it for that situation. But it's because the basic system is broken. It's not because of Medicaid itself isn't the problem. Anyway, you raised it as a public policy question. I'll give you my public policy answer.
And that's a great note to end on. Driving into work this morning, I heard on the radio that we are one of the only countries that does not have a unified long-term care system. We have this series of ad hoc programs, ad hoc housing options, ad hoc financing systems, and this is why it's so hard to understand how to proceed. So I'm very grateful to Don and Lisa for sharing their wisdom. It scratches the surface of what you probably all would like to know and what we all would like to know, but they've gotten us off to a great start, so please join me in thanking them, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's fun again.
And don't forget the feedback forms and our website at www.bc.edu/shawevents will have updated programming information for next year. Thank you.